Hey everybody, welcome back. Wayne here. We're going to continue our series that we started last week on the things that make us vulnerable to an affair. And this week we're going to talk about the relational vulnerabilities. While marriages don't cause affairs, they certainly can make one or both parties vulnerable. The crisis of infidelity provides a unique opportunity to take a deeper look into the marital interactions that may have caused instability to begin with. Let me say this again, and let me say it very clearly. No matter how rough your marriage may be, marriages neither cause nor excuse infidelity. In fact, not all unfaithful spouses report being dissatisfied in their marriage. And at the very most, the marriage itself can only take responsibility for about a third of the level of dissatisfaction. Therefore, since marriages can't take 100% responsibility for an affair, improving your marriage isn't all it takes to prevent a repeat of performance. The goal this week is to help you identify issues that might be making your marriage vulnerable. Again, this in no way just is a justification for betrayal. Those of us who have been unfaithful still have choices and have to take responsibility for our behavior. There are two people in every unstable marriage, and usually only one of them is unfaithful. Sometimes it's two, but most often it's just one. And as I said in last week's newsletter, my goal is not to place blame, but to allow you to recognize where you and your spouse may be vulnerable so that you can make and seek healing and make better choices. I got to tell you from here on out, if you want to move forward, neither partner is off the hook. Discovering a life of meaning and purpose and fulfillment will take individual work on both of your parts, as well as some joint effort in repairing and improving your relationship. The following is a list of relational issues. It is not exhaustive by any means, but it will hopefully give you a place to start. And just like last week, there's an inventory at the end of this newsletter that will help you determine your levels of vulnerability. It comes from Shirley Glass and her book, Not Just Friends, so I encourage you to take it and just follow the instructions that are there with you. So the first relational issue that I want to just name is what we call a child-centered marriage. A marriage begins with two adults and they create what we call this marital subsystem. In that initial state of marriage, they are able to fully offer themselves to one another with no doubts and no interference. But then children come along and new roles are introduced. Not only are we husband and wife, but now we're also mom and dad. So the second law of thermodynamics states that you can never get more out of a system than you put into it. And in fact, you can't even get out of a system what you put into it. Take the example of a Bunsen burner. If you remember chemistry class in high school, you take a beaker of water and you heat it up to a boil and then you turn it off. You don't get a one-for-one exchange of energy from that Bunsen burner to the water. The second law of thermodynamics holds true for the marital subsystem as well. You can never get more out of a marriage than you can put into it. Don't go confusing family with marriage. They're not the same thing. Families represent both the marital subsystem and the parental subsystem, and the task of those two entities are vastly different. For a strong marriage to exist, ongoing effort or energy has to be put into the marriage to keep it alive. Failure to make this substantial investment in the marital subsystem, the husband and wife, cause the marriage to disintegrate, and the ensuing loss of connection leaves the marriage at risk. I hear this at least once a week when I ask a couple, where do you think things started to go wrong? And it's with the birth of that first child. And it's not that that first child was anything wrong with him or her. It's these new roles that were created that you weren't prepared for. So that's a really good topic for you two to begin to discuss about being a child-centered marriage or not. Do you have a child-centered marriage or not? Another vulnerability that we see in our offices quite frequently is this parental crisis. And let's say, for example, that children come in, they create circumstances in that marriage that might make it vulnerable, especially if a child is acting out and mom and dad have a difference of opinion or a choice on how to respond. And sometimes one or the other won't respond at all. And that's when the marriage can be placed at risk. Contempt then often sets in, comes into play, and where there's this difference of opinion over an issue. It's important, that both husband and wife are able to come and work out together a plan on how to handle that situation. Contempt causes devaluation, and you can't understand how the person we're married to can be so blind not to see how this needs to be handled. We judge the fact that they don't see things as we see them, and so we judge that as inadequate. And the devaluation creates that vulnerability. The raising and discipline and caring and nurturing of children is one of the most common sources of marital discord. I see it every week. In order for marriages to remain strong, we have to maintain an attitude of respect and be willing to work together as equal partners. Failure to do that will leave either party vulnerable to others who might come along and validate us by sharing our ideas and our opinions. So we naturally feel what irritates us, but we have to actively look for what we appreciate about our mate. And we have to be willing to talk about these really difficult, challenging things, especially with children. So if you and your mate can't pull it together in handling a difficult child or a difficult situation with a child, or whatever the issue that's causing contempt, then find an outside party to help you get on the same page, or at least see clearly what each other's pages look like and where that comes from. Don't let the difference in the parental subsystem make you vulnerable to an inappropriate outside support. Another area of vulnerability is what John Gottman calls the unskilled marriage. So John Gottman spent years researching what causes marriages to succeed or fail. Most marriages could be very, very satisfying if both parties knew how to relate to each other. But unfortunately, a lot of us, when we got married, were clueless. For a marriage to thrive, husbands and wives need to educate each other on how to love, how to soothe, how to nurture and affirm one another. And we do this by being in an active and open relationship. I think that's led by curiosity. Curiosity about why each of you believe what you believe and feel what you feel. We do this by listening deeply. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, I think. So we have to listen to what we say ourselves and what our partner is saying and what they're feeling, and then responding with questions until we really understand what they're saying and where that belief comes from. It takes time, lots and lots and lots of time, effort, and a willingness to get outside help if you need it. Gottman is also famous for saying that couples wait almost 6 years too late to get any kind of help. So if you're struggling in this area, get some help. There's tons of help out there. Then there's the inflexible marriage. Life is full of transitions, and failure to navigate these critical points in time leave marriages vulnerable. When we first get married, we consciously or unconsciously create a marital map of who's responsible for what and how things will be done. But the division of labor negotiated by a newlywed couple doesn't necessarily work after the birth of the child or children or a more demanding job. With the introduction of a child, let's say, an increased demand, the initial marriage map may have to be adapted, and inflexible marriages struggle with adapting to change. Almost all marriages experience the following points of transition: the birth of a child, the second child, a third child, and then children leave for school, and then there's adolescence, and then there's the children leaving home, and then there's empty nest, And don't forget about job transitions and then caring for elderly parents. Each one of these life transitions requires an adjustment to the marital map. Healthy marriages adjust to this ever-changing landscape of life through the use of negotiation and compromise and conversation. Rigidity and a refusal to change creates this brittle system which will eventually stop working for someone and increase the marital vulnerability. And then next we talk about this unstable marriage, a marriage where one partner is consistently contradicting their mate's opinion creates this unstable marital system and leaves the other party feeling unsupported, or at least like they have no influence or very little influence. It's natural for us to have these differing opinions and perspectives, but loyalty to our mates require tolerating their perspective without correcting it. Tolerance is about accepting another person in spite of our differences. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with their opinion. And to even go a step further, I think learning to celebrate those differences, not just tolerate them. Tolerating them is a good first step. But as you work through your own issues and the marital discord, hopefully you come to this place where you can start to celebrate and see the value of the difference and how that propels you both to a better place. Another area of vulnerability is what we call the sexually embattled marriage. The sexual differences between men and women are far wider and much more common than most couples can understand. Assuming that your mate's motivation for being sexual are the same as your own is a recipe for disappointment and sometimes disaster for both of you. Unwillingness to get help in addressing sexual issues leaves couples extremely vulnerable. John Gottman talks about that 2/3 of all marital problems are unsolvable. And if that's true, then we're only going to see things eye to eye about 1/3 of the time. And so bludgeoning your mate or cutting them off to get them to see things your way will only create additional vulnerabilities. And refusing to address the shame and any other issue around your sexual relationship makes matters even worse. I see that issue around shame and sex every single day. I'm asking you to please deal with that one, regardless of the infidelities. Getting the necessary help for the two of you to find new motivation for being sexual and new ways to be physically intimate is so wildly important. Another area of vulnerability is what we call the intimacy avoidant marriage. Intimacy can and often does create short-term instability. And intimacy is a willingness to be authentic and let your mate know who you are and what you're doing, thinking, and feeling, and what we believe and why we believe certain things. It's also a willingness to explore these deep mysteries of your spouse's life, their heart, their spirit, their soul, all of that. Once married, the illusion that we're the same is shattered quickly. It took me years to realize that oneness is not sameness. Couples often confuse intimacy with closeness. And closeness is this pseudo form of intimacy where one or both parties have to compromise their true self in order to maintain the illusion that we see things the same way or so that we are loved and accepted. The result is that we don't know who we are, and neither does our spouse. When couples avoid intimacy, marriages begin to atrophy, and it feels as if we're just roommates sharing living quarters. I hear couples talk about being brothers and sisters or roommates all the time. Real marriages require real people, and shallow marriages with little or no intimacy are far more vulnerable. So learn how to handle conflict well and be intimate and be authentic and get some outside help if you need that. One of my favorite things that we do at EMS Weekend and Online is this exercise called Truth and Love. It is my most favorite thing of all time. You've probably heard me talk about it. Because for those of us that are intimate avoidant, conflict avoidant, It's a great exercise. So if you've been through any of those courses, and I think Harboring Hope and Hope for Healing have versions of that too, put that tool into practice and see what happens in your relationship if you continue to do that. And then there's the imbalanced marriage. Marital imbalances come in many, many forms. One form is this underinvestment versus overinvestment. If one party invests far more into the marriage and the running of the family, then the underinvested partner is gonna be more vulnerable. Their lack of investment makes the marriage and the family seem less valuable and makes it easier to consider walking away from the marriage than the overinvested partner. Underinvested partners have this tendency to be absent, doing what they want to do with little thought to the burden placed on their mate. This pattern can leave the invested partner feeling abandoned. The overinvested partner places a much higher value in the marriage and the family, and leaving them less vulnerable to giving up on what they've worked so hard to create. Some marriages suffer from a parent-child type of relationship, and this marriage has an extreme power imbalance and leaves one party feeling disrespected and powerless. Being treated like a child results in that person feeling devalued and like they don't matter to the mate. In this type of relationship, the dissatisfaction leaves both parties very vulnerable to an affair, whether it's emotional or sexual. And the last one I want to talk about today is what we call the broken marriage. When relational bonds are broken by misunderstandings or differences, failures, self-centeredness, these bonds need to be repaired. All marriages, all of them, experience good times as well as bad. With 2/3 of all marital problems being unsolvable, it's inevitable that we'll experience some disappointment. There will also be times when words and actions will wound our mate. It may not be these wounds that create marital vulnerability. It's our inability to repair and reconnect after the damage occurs. Hear me say this, that repair is so vitally important. We're gonna have ruptures. It's where we learn so much is in the repair, when we take the time to talk and examine what goes on inside of me and talk about that and then make a necessary repair for that rupture. That's where we all learn. And you think about this, everything we ever learned in our life came in the context of a relationship. And it's in the repair in this relationship with your spouse where both parties hopefully continue to learn and grow. And I think that's going to happen throughout the rest of our lives. Good marriages accept that there will be wounding and withdrawals, and they take responsibility for those wounds and keep them clean and putting effort or energy into their marriage. They know how to repair the hurts, or they're learning how to repair those hurts in their relationship and refuse to allow failure to drive them further and further apart. So like I said earlier, this is in no way an exhaustive list of the marital patterns which increase marital vulnerabilities. I hope it will give you at least a place to start. And if you have others that I haven't mentioned, please feel free to comment, because this is how we all learn in this forum and in these online community that we have. And if you have any of the above mentioned vulnerabilities, please don't panic. Your marriage is not doomed, and none of these issues are an excuse to leave the marriage. This is intended to serve as just this basic guide. And also, if you're stuck, I really invite you to consider taking the Next EMS online course. It's a course for couples to navigate through the journey of infidelity and the recovery and the vulnerabilities and all the pitfalls. So I hope that you will consider that. Please remember that marriage problems aren't responsible for the choices, but improving how we do marriage can certainly help us learn how to better love one another and appreciate what we have in this relationship. So I just want to thank you again for joining me and giving me your time this week. We're going to continue down this road one more time next week, where we talk about individual issues and individual vulnerabilities within a marriage or within a long-term committed relationship. So thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys again next week.